I wanted to start this morning with an observation, and then I'll get into the talk, which is on the equality of women and men. Not men and women, but women and men. I say it that way because it already jars you, because we're used to saying men and women, and you say women and men, and it kind of takes you back, and it kind of stops before it seeks into your cerebral cortex or wherever that goes. What I wanted to observe was simply well, my mother used to say, God works in mysterious ways, which she usually observed after something incredibly awful had happened and we had no explanation for it, or something incredibly good that came about by some unforeseen way, in which case she was talking about the indirection with which God sees the end in the beginning. But as Hand of the Cause Fazey used to say, the only decent prayer we can really pray is that the will of God be done, because if you ask for something and you're insistent and God gives it to you, it may not be the best. I mean, God is not going to do anything that is going to hurt you, that ultimately anything God ordains for you is for redounds to your benefit. I say that this morning simply because right this minute, my wife and the other, who's on the secretary of the ATC in the Hillsborough County cluster, or the Tampa cluster as it's called, is out teaching door to door. This is the second day or the third day of our expansion phase of our 6th IPG. And the second time we've used door-to-door teaching, and it is having amazing success. And my mother's axiom plays into this in that I was thinking once again this morning, the amazing inspiration that the House of Justice received in its infallible guidance, that you have something that I don't recall many other organizations having, namely a top-down mandate that bottom-up activities be the mainstay of the spread of the Baha'i faith. And if that's not clear to you, we can discuss it sometime. But I see the Rui books here, and I see some of you having come from your institute courses. And who would have thought from our American Western mentality and point of view that you could have some great change in an organization take place by mandating that it, from the top, that it be done on the bottom. I'm just saying the same thing over. Suffice it to say that it's incredible to me the effect that this direct teaching is having, not only on our community insofar as introducing people to the faith whom we never would have reached otherwise, but also the effect it's having on the community, those who are doing it and those who have agreed to go to our point of gathering for this particular cycle of teaching and say the Tablet of Ahmad or other prayers, and those who are at their homes doing the same, and those who from other clusters have come to see how it's done and simply to enjoy it, to enjoy doing it. So that's what's happening right now, so keep them in your thoughts. I'm going to talk this morning about the equality of women and men. It's based to a large extent on a chapter in a book my brother and I wrote called The Law of Love Enshrined. But it's been 20 years since I presented this paper. I actually didn't present it because my wife was having our son James at the time, and I had to stay with her. So David Young read the paper at the gathering of the Association for Baha'i Studies that was meeting in San Francisco. I'm not going to read the paper to you. I abhor being subjected to that, and I don't particularly enjoy doing it. But I am going to base what I'm going to say largely on what's in that, plus a few other things. The first point that's particularly relevant to a discussion of the equality of women and men in terms of the Baha'i teachings on this subject is this obvious but nevertheless well worth repeating axiom or divine principle or divine law of reality, and that is women and men did not become equal because Baha'u'llah said it. They always have been. This is not a new reality, at least not spiritually, not in fact. But once the manifestation articulates that principle, he usually will also articulate the systematic incorporation, and the word incorporate is quite well chosen because it means to put in flesh. He institutes that principle in social systems, familial, and of course the three systems we have in the Baha'i faith are the local community consisting of families. So we have the family, the community, and then the various clustering of those communities are the territorial area which incorporates those communities, and then the House of Justice, which gives us guidance. So basically, of course, this remapping of the world that we now have into clusters. There's not one part of the world, as you all know, that's not in a Baha'i cluster. So we have remapped the world not just for Baha'i purposes, but literally as a forerunner of how future society will look. Now, what does this have to do with the equality of women and men? It has to do with the fact that Baha'u'llah institutes this law of reality, that women and men are equal in the family and in the community and in, of course, the House of Justice. Now, we could simply stop there and say, that's it. Men and women are equal. They always have been, and Baha'u'llah has instigated the habituation of that law in daily activities in the family life, the community life, and the global life of the planet. But we have in the Baha'i faith questions that inevitably arise. And it's interesting that no other manifestation has articulated this principle. Doesn't mean they weren't aware of it. It doesn't mean they might not have liked to. They all have dealt with it in one way or another by the gradual implementation of more and more equitable or just guidance for the treatment of women. But it is only now that it is timely. And of course, we have that wonderful statement that Baha'u'llah makes, that he's actually quoting from another source. How manifold are the truths which must remain unuttered until the appointed time is come. Even as it hath been said. So he's not saying it, it says it hath been said. Not everything that a man knoweth can be disclosed, nor can everything that he can disclose be regarded as timely, nor can every timely utterance be considered as suited to the capacity of those who hear it. So the manifestations always knew this, but it wasn't the time. It wasn't, there weren't circumstances to carry it out. It would have been more unjust than to articulate it than it would have been just, which may sound strange until you realize that, for example, Mohammed, ordaining that a man could have as many as 4 wives so long as he treated them all equitably, was rendering a more just decision than the alternative, which would be that women would just have to fend for themselves if they didn't have a husband and they had no means of doing so. And we could go into the cultural environment which created those circumstances, but we don't want to get distracted from our principal concern, which is those ostensible distinctions and real distinctions between men and women that appear in the Baha'i writings. These deal primarily with the fact that women are not on the House of Justice, that women are not forbidden but are encouraged not to be placed in combatant roles in warfare, that women in the laws of inheritance are men, let's put it the other way, are given primacy insofar as control of financial affairs, insofar as the law of inheritance is concerned. And a couple other things which ascribe, or which would seem to ascribe to women a sort of traditional role, namely that the woman has primary responsibility for the children and the husband has primary responsibility for the financial well-being of a household. Now let's see if we can wade through these successfully and come to some successful conclusions about the mysterious way in which God works through Baha'u'llah for this particular age. Because we've got ages to go yet. You know, this dispensation may well be 16% of it may already be gone. And we haven't even gotten the lesser piece finished yet, okay? So we've got a long ways to go, and a long ways to go after this dispensation. I'm going to give you some quotes, and I'm not going to give you the sources this time. Just take a string literal from it and you can look it up on Ocean. Most of these quotes can be found in the compilation on women. First, to reaffirm what I said, Baha'u'llah himself states, women and men have always been and always will be equal in the sight of God. Now you could say, oh, well, in the sight of God they're equal, but why doesn't he make them equal in society? And the fact is he does. Now, we can resolve all of these problems with one statement that the House of Justice made when this issue was even more heated than it is now. And that was about 10 or 15 years ago, when many of the Baha'i women, particularly those in academia, we're very much concerned about our writings which state, on the one hand, that one of our foremost principles is the equality of men and women, and yet we have these seemingly egregious distinctions between men and women in regard to these particular categories, 4 or 5 of them that I've mentioned. We even also have a statement in the writings that the man can strategically be called the head of the household in some sense. These would seem, together with the woman's primary responsibility to raise the children, as regressive in terms of the modern perspective of the equality of women and men. The quote from the House of Justice, which I'm obviously trying to find, I say obviously because I'm hemming and hawing here around. I probably know it by memory. Yeah, I think I do. Well, let me just quote it from memory. The equality of status does not mean identity of function. Equality of status does not mean identity of function. That means you can have 2 individuals of equal capacity, of equal status in society or in whatever way you want, but they don't have to do the same thing. So, for example, however equal women and men become, men are never going to have babies. Now, that's a biological fact. That's a law of nature. All right? That doesn't mean they're not equal. In what sense? In other words, equality doesn't mean sameness. And so we have, and of course at this point in our development as human beings, we don't know how much of what we would call feminine traits or attributes and masculine traits and attributes are learned, are societal, are nurtured as opposed to nature. But we do know they're there. And the Baha'i writings confirm that there are attributes that are inherently feminine and attributes that are inherently masculine. So the ones we know today are mostly learned. So men are the defenders of the household because, well, physiologically men have development insofar as their bodies are concerned, which generally makes them stronger than women. All right? So by nature, men have been traditionally assigned that role of being the physical defender of the family. Well, again, there's an inequality there. You can have a woman who, through great exercise and effort, can make herself as strong or stronger than other men. But by nature, this is just not so. So let's keep in mind as we go through these particular concerns this statement by the House of Justice: equality of status does not imply identity of function. Now, if we apply this to anything that does not have to do with inherent distinction, such as serving on the House of Justice, then we're in error. We're in apparent and palpable error. Because there is no distinction in capacity, intellectual, spiritual capacity between men and women. All of what we call human capacities are equally shared by both. So when we talk about what we take to the next world, we're talking about our reason, our memory, our will, all our intellectual and spiritual capacities we will take with us. And all of these are equally distributed, except that Abdu'l-Baha says, in a couple of respects, the woman is superior. Now, if he means that at this point in history they are, or are they permanently that way? I don't know. I'll simply read you what he says and you can decide. My inference from the way it is stated is that these are permanent distinctions. In some passages, Abdu'l-Baha seems to imply inherent and permanent gender traits. He states that woman has greater moral courage than the man. She has also special gifts which enable her to govern in moments of danger and crisis. Then in another quote, he says that woman is more tender-hearted, more receptive. Her intuition is more intense. And in another quote, in sciences, in arts, in virtues and perfections, women shall become equal to men. And as regard to tenderness of heart and the abundance of mercy and sympathy, women are superior. Are. Now, again, does that mean they are now because they've had to work behind the scenes and become intuitive rather than overt? I don't know. But I infer from some of that these are inherent distinctions. And having lived with a woman for a long time, my lovely wife, I know she's smarter and I know she's more intuitive. Now, of course, we're two individuals, so I can't go on that. But some of that I feel is inherently hers, but you can't generalize from one individual, I know. So, if we go back to the problem of women on the House of Justice, it cannot be anything to do with capacity of any sort, spiritual or intellectual or any other kind of human capacity. So we'll put that one aside later, how we're going to resolve that then. All right? So let's stick that over here and get to those that are a little more easy to deal with in terms of how can these distinctions in law, in the Agdas, be made when the principle underlying it all is men and women, or women and men, are equal in all human capacities. Let's deal with the simplest one, inheritance. It may not sound like it's the simplest, but it is. For me, it's the simplest to deal with. First of all, we can understand the logic behind why women are have primary responsibility for raising children. They have the children. And they are the first educators of the children, which brings us, of course, to the law that if you have a man and woman who are husband and wife and they have children, and only one can be educated, that the woman's education should have priority in as much as she will be the educator of the children, and therefore, if one has to come first, it will be she. Because of this responsibility. Now, this does not mean that the man doesn't have an equal responsibility for the children. In other words, we can't fill in or extend that law to imply this is eternal and inextricable. There's one other principle up here with the abiding principle of the essential equality in human capacities, and Equality of status does not mean identity of function. There's another one we need to put up there, and that is that each family is like, the Guardian says, a small community. Each family must figure out its own affairs. So, for example, the man has primary responsibility, and in fact, the Guardian says, the members of a family all have duties and responsibilities towards one another and to the family as a whole, and these duties and responsibilities vary from member to member and in the course of their natural relationships. The parents have the inescapable duty to educate their children, but not vice versa. The children have the duty to obey their parents. The parents do not obey the children, except in our society. The mother, not the father, bears the children, nurses them in babyhood, and is thus their first educator. Hence, daughters have a prior right to education over sons. And as the Guardian Secretary has written on his behalf, the task of bringing up a child, Baha'i child, as emphasized time and time again in the Baha'i writings, is the chief responsibility of the mother, whose unique privilege it is to create in her home such conditions as would be the most conducive to both his material, his material and spiritual welfare and advancement. The referent of his is the child. Well, this goes on. This is quoted from the House of Justice, and I'll give you the date on that one. That's a letter to New Zealand in 1980. Now, here's the quote I was referring to. These distinctions in primary areas of responsibility, namely the raising of the child to the mother, the material well-being of the family, the father, are primary. They're not inevitable, and they're not ceaseless. Such distinctions most emphatically do not imply that the man has no parental responsibilities or that the woman is less capable than the man of earning a living, or that the woman does not have full and equal part in making all financial decisions. Indeed, the House of Justice notes that these relationships and responsibilities must be worked out within the exigencies of each individual family. So if you have a case where the woman can make more money and so on, and the husband stays at home, takes care of the children, nothing wrong with that. That family consultation, this is a quote from the House of Justice, will help to provide the answers. So in other words, each family is its own little community, and consultation and so on will determine how these principles apply in the particular situation of a particular family. Neither sex has primacy in consultation. Consultation means all have an equal voice in that discussion. In addition, the House of Justice notes that the role of the woman as mother does not by any means imply, and this is a quote, that the place of the woman is confined to the home, or that the man's deprived of the responsibility for an equal part in raising the children. All right? Primary responsibilities, but not inevitable and inextricable. Now, I said inheritance. Well, why did I do all that before we talk about inheritance? Because there's one thing that a lot of people miss when they read the Agdas and read about the distinction made in the law of inheritance between women and men. Now, first, before I tell you the answer, I'm going to read you a statement from the House of Justice that sort of clarifies or restates that law or that principle. The task of bringing up a child, as emphasized time and time again in the Baha'i writings, is the chief responsibility of the mother, whose unique privilege it is to create in her home such conditions as would be conducive to both his material and spiritual welfare and advancement. I just read that. The training which a child first receives through his mother constitutes the strongest foundation for his future development. A corollary of this responsibility of the mother is her right to be supported by her husband. I'll read that again. A corollary of this responsibility of the mother is her right to be supported by her husband. A husband has no explicit right to be supported by his wife. This principle of the husband's responsibility to provide for and protect the family can be seen applied also in the law of intestacy, which provides that the family's dwelling place passes on the father's death not to his widow but to his eldest son. The son at the same time has the responsibility to care for his mother. So in other words, the primary responsibility that was the father's when the father deceases now devolves to the primary responsibility of the eldest son, primogeniture. But wait, why? Why does it have to be that way? And the answer is, it doesn't. You know, one critical word in that passage is what? Intestacy. This isn't an inevitable principle by which a will should be devised. It may be a wise one, but not inevitably. Let me explain. The wisdom of it is obvious. If the primary financial responsibilities in a family are the father's, then we would presume that would carry on. But intestacy means that someone died without doing what? Making a will. And making a will in the Baha'i faith is what? A what? Obligatory law for everyone. Which means someone didn't do his job or her job. They didn't obey the law. So what has Baha'u'llah done? He's taking a family which is now in apparent disarray. Disarray because someone didn't do what they were supposed to do, and clarify who's to do what. Now, for example, my brother, in his will, left his estate and its control after the decease of his wife in the hands of his eldest daughter, not his eldest son. Why? Because he felt she had a better capacity to make such decisions. He didn't follow that. Well, my brother's not an exemplar, so it doesn't mean we should follow him. No, it doesn't. But it means that when you're making your will, you make it out according to what the exigencies of your peculiar situation, which is going to be different from every other family that ever was or ever will be, because every family is slightly different from every other family. So there you go. What has Baha'u'llah done? He's made order out of disorder by saying, in the event of intestacy, these principles shall be applied. And that goes through that whole paradigm of the will that you find in the Agdas. Now, does that mean that there is no other wisdom, that you shouldn't even look at it unless you're on an assembly and someone in your community has died intestate? without leaving a will? No, obviously not. Obviously, you want to look at the wisdom in it and try to figure out what the wisdom is in every law. Now, this goes back to my mother's saying, God works in strange and mysterious ways. Well, they really aren't. They're very logical ways. God is logical. Everything he does is logical. We can't always see it. And so to us, they're strange and mysterious. But if we could see the end and the beginning of any given act of God, we would understand the divine logic. All right? So, there is a divine wisdom in this, and in every law, there is no such thing as an arbitrary law, either by Baha'u'llah or any other prophet of God. They all have a divine logic and wisdom. So they're strange and mysterious, these laws, to us at a certain time. But what does Baha'u'llah say? Let's set that aside for now. So that knocks down one of these problems, I hope. All right? The law of inheritance is a law applied to someone or some family that is now confused because nobody knows who gets what or who should do what because the person didn't leave a will, therefore didn't leave anyone in charge, and the whole estate is up for grabs. And you've seen time and time again in the news what happens when some celebrity dies without a will. And even if they left a will, they'll try to take the will apart, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So what was the other one? Well, the other one is the military. Now, women are not forbidden to be in the military, so far as I understand it. It's just that they are, let me see if I can find a quote on that. If I can't, then we'll just deal with it. I mean, if women can do better in times of crisis, I would want them on the front line myself. But there is, I don't know if I can get, if I can find this. It's a 20-page paper, and I don't remember where it is. Here we go. They are exempt from military engagements. And there's some other writings on that. Of course, we have already witnessed the effect, and are witnessing, and will continue to witness, the dire and inhumane and inhuman effects of combat on an individual by the astounding acceleration of the rate of suicides by combatant soldiers in our current conflict. They will never be the same, these individuals. Their humanity has been somewhat destroyed for this part of their lives. They will have to wait until their birth into the next stage of their existence to be rid of that pain. And if you have a choice as to which you want to maim, the person with financial responsibilities or the person whose primary responsibility is for raising children, your hard choice is take the person who's going to get at least the military benefits, and will not be so deranged as to not be able intelligently and spiritually to raise children. So we can get into that some other time, insofar as all of the exigencies involved in women in the military, what's appropriate or inappropriate about it, and so on. But suffice it to say, the writings state that it is preferable for women not to be engaged in military combat. And of course, we've faced all kinds of problems because of that right now. And again, I don't want to focus the talk on that. We come to the most challenging and most difficult for non-Baha'is and even some Baha'is to abide: women on the House of Justice. Why aren't women on the House of Justice? Now, I could stop at this point and have anyone who thinks he or she knows the reason for this raise his or her hand, and we would probably have a good half-hour discussion or 2-hour discussion, or we could talk all day. But it would be useless because of one simple quote of Abdu'l-Baha. So let me get to that. Well, I can't find that one offhand, but I'm going to, because I'm not going to fake this quote. Now, the reason this is important is obvious, but the trouble that has arisen around it has subsided somewhat, or at least it's not as vituperous as I recall it being, or at least people aren't sharing their vituperation with me, for which I'm greatly pleased. But there were all kinds of letters that this was a decision that was applicable at the time of Baha'u'llah, but it could be changed and so on. A letter has come out from the House of Justice saying this cannot be changed in this dispensation, that this is a law of Baha'u'llah. It will not be changed, not by the House of Justice, not during this dispensation. Doesn't mean it won't be in the next dispensation. But here's the quote that's the overriding axiomatic law about your considerations of the logic behind this. Remember, we said there is a rational, obvious reason for everything that God does and everything that his emissaries, the manifestations of God, do. Now, some of this is my writing, I'll say when it switches to the important or authoritative text. Abdu'l-Baha states, "In no movement will they be left behind. Their rights with men are equal in degree. They will enter all the administrative branches of politics. They will attain in all such a degree as will be considered the very highest station of the world of humanity, and will take part in all affairs, period." With this clear statement of the equality of women and men, let us consider a distinction of duties that seems unrelated to matters of rearing children, the crucial role of membership on the House of Justice. How can we not infer from this distinction of function a sense of the woman as less capable in some as yet unknown way? If we approach this issue by asking ourselves what it is that qualifies men that does not qualify women, or the converse, what capabilities do women not have that men have, then we have already strayed from the logic and integrity of the Baha'i principle. That question you can't ask. It's inappropriate. Why? Once you have established that there is absolutely no distinction in human capacity between men and women, such questions automatically become illogical and unfounded. We can infer as much from Abdul Baha's statement that, quote, ere long, the wisdom of this distinction will be, quote, manifest and clear as the sun at high noon. In other words, when you know, you will know you know. And if we can spend 2 hours guessing, then we don't know that we know, which means we don't know yet. But it will become known. And when it does, as I say in this, there was a point early in the development of the faith where Abdul Baha advised the women of Persia, specifically the women of Persia, now engage of matters of pure spirituality and do not contend with men. Now that was as Faizi said, don't ever take the quotes out of context. That was in a letter written at a particular time to the women of Persia. All right? And Abdul Baha goes on to say that in time you will come to understand the reason for this advice, and you will say, quote, this was indeed supreme wisdom. Now there will come a time then when this reason for women not being on the house of justice will be as clear as the sun at noon. And at that time, I have no doubt, we will indeed declare this indeed was supreme wisdom. And when we know it, as I say, I always compare it in a way, and I mean to cast a pall over possessing such knowledge. It would be wonderful if we knew. A lot of people think they know. The one thing I feel I know is that whatever it is has to be circumstantial. That is, something dealing with the circumstances of this time, this place, I don't know. But if it can't, in other words, you almost have to conclude that if it's not an inherent distinction, then it has to be circumstantial. In the same way that if men and women are equal and Muhammad says you can have as many as 4 wives, then there has to be something else going on. Well, there was. All right. Now, what those circumstances might be, I don't know. I've heard a lot of speculation about what those circumstances might be, and a couple of them I think are probably correct, but it doesn't matter. The point is, we always ask, you think the calamity described in the Citadel of Faith has happened yet? You think it has? You think that it was the Second World War? Or how about this, or how about that, Read the first paragraph of The Promised Day Is Come, and you will conclude what? If it had happened, we wouldn't have to ask the question, because it will be not an event, but a process in which all of the world leaders will have willingly ceded a portion of their sovereignty to establish a global commonwealth or federation of governments. Not because of the faith, not because they had become spiritually galvanized, not out of the goodness of their hearts or the magnanimity and altruism of their character, but out of dire necessity. It will not be a Baha'i event. It will not even ostensibly be a spiritual event. It will be a necessity. And the point is that it will be of such a nature that there won't be a person on this globe, however isolated, even if they're in New Zealand, that won't be aware of it. I say New Zealand because that's where in the 60s everybody who was afraid of the calamity used to think about going or actually went. I've been there, and I wouldn't mind living there myself. So, in other words, the same principle, I feel, applies to this question. When we know, we will all know, and it will be so apparent and obvious that we will wonder why we asked the question in the first place. Now, I'm going to finish with this one analogy that has been often, I feel, if not misused, or it hasn't been fully appreciated. There is the pamphlet that came out from the National Spiritual Assembly about probably, I guess it's 10 years ago now, The Wings of One Bird, which is on the equality of women and men. And of course, the title comes from, I don't need to, you're all familiar with it, from Abdu'l-Baha, who says that humanity is like a bird that has two wings. One is male, one is female. And until both are equally developed, the bird cannot fly, or at least it'll fly around in circles, depending on which is overdeveloped. All right. Now that's real nice. It's a sweet analogy, but it's deeper than is apparent. You don't want two left wings. You don't want two right wings. And so even as the House of Justice and the Guardian have observed, you don't have the equality of women and men by having women become more like men. Now, I don't mean that in terms of stay at home or anything like this. I think the principles we've articulated have been very clear, that the woman has the prerogatives, all the prerogatives that a man does in every field of endeavor, and just as much capacity and so on. Both have primary responsibilities, but those are primary and temporary. But there is a distinction between male and female. The biological ones we're aware of. The others we are not aware of as acutely as we would be if we were in an egalitarian society. And that is, we can only speculate what are the inherent distinctions of nature and character. We know what we mean by it, by what is feminine. It certainly doesn't necessarily mean withdrawn, or, you think of Tahireh or Fatima or the other Mary, the mother of Christ, and these figures weren't retiring and so on. These are women of power and force. All right? So we don't mean that, but there is something that we are aware of, possibly, that is maybe in touch with reality. But as I say, we're so at this point ingrained in us by a society, or ingrained in a society, and our point of views shaped by a society, that we really don't know what is a healthy male role, what is a healthy female role. In fact, the word role itself is abhorrent to most people talking about such a subject, because they seem to be something that is imposed on you as opposed to something you choose. So we can only guess at or intuit to a certain degree what, again, you think of Rahia Khanum. This was a woman of chutzpah, of supreme confidence and assurance, and yet of supreme beauty and elegance. Incredibly intimidating on the one hand, and yet spent her life going on the Green Light expedition in South America and the similar expedition in Africa, who spent her life among the humblest of people and could communicate most openly with them, and had even a sort of disdain, as did Tahirih, for the intellectuals of her day. So we don't really know what we mean by this, but we know that there is that there is such a thing as feminine qualities and masculine qualities. We've talked about them in traditional ways. But I said I was going to end with that analogy, but let me finish the analogy and then I'll end with one more thing. The fact is, we don't want two left wings or two right wings, and that the object is not just to have a happy bird. The object of humanity is flight, an ever-advancing civilization. So the object of the bird is not the bird. The object of the bird is flight. And it can only be attained then when you have whatever the highest attributes of women are and the highest attributes of men are understood before they can be developed and then developed. So we have to study this, experiment with it. And I suspect until we, it's very interesting, and I've said this many times, but it's terribly important to me. The focus of the Agdas is not on the blueprint for a global civilization. The focus is on creating a healthy individual in a healthy family. That almost all of the Agdas is dealing with that. It deals with community interaction and life too. But when you say this is the blueprint for a global civilization, it was, but the focus of that civilization is on the family. That's the building block of any civilization. That's it. Right? The final thing I wanted to say is this, and it's kind of interesting, speaking of what these distinctions are or are not. And by the way, I hope you understand by now, they have nothing to do with why women are not allowed to be on the House of Justice for this dispensation. And that's not the best way of saying that, is it? Why Baha'u'llah has decided in his wisdom that it is not the best course of action for our world for women to be on the House of Justice during this dispensation. That's the best way to say it, or close to it.
Why there is mercy and bounty for them not to serve.
There may be mercy and bounty, but there is a divine wisdom and rationale to it too. And whether it's, should you have less mercy for men than you do for women? I don't think so. Let me finish, and then we will discuss whatever you want. There used to be a senior seminar in the college where I taught until I retired 6 months ago. Praise be God. It was during the time of sort of the end of the hippie era when people could choose their own curricula and they could, and we were trying to get it together and be really humane and human and so on. And so before people graduated, there was a seminar they had to attend, which was pass or fail. It wasn't graded. And it was sort of, now that you've gone into your different disciplines and your different majors, we're going to toss you back together again like you were when you were freshmen, as you were when you were freshmen. And I still have grammatical sensibilities. And you're going to discuss whatever the teacher wants you to discuss and so on. And so, I mean, basically, the teacher could create whatever he or she wanted. Well, naturally, I, using my Baha'i background, dealt with the attempt to create an integrating principle in society. So I could deal with every effort being made to unify society. And we dealt with all kinds of things, political organizations and institutions, secular organizations, institutions, the United Nations, so on. And I would bring in speakers. I had a cadre of speakers I would have come in and deal with that. And I had some incredible experiences, which I wish I could share with you, but it would take hours. Suffice to say, when I dealt with what was then the very hot issue of, because the women's movement was in full swing at this point, particularly among white, middle-class American women who had consciousness-raising groups and so on. And so as part of this discussion, I would have the students put on a blackboard. They were actually green boards. Of course, they're white boards now. As ever-advancing civilization for you. And so I'd say, I want you to write down all of the attributes you can think, whether you agree with them or not, that are commonly held about what are the attributes of a male, a man. Good or bad, and just what are male characteristics. And then I would pull down one of those little maps or thing over that. And then I said, all right, now I want you to do the same thing for a female. What are the common attributes or commonly accepted preconceptions about what a female is like? And they did that. Then I did a third column. And you think this would be obvious, but it's not. And you can try this with a class if you want. It actually works. I would do a third column and I would say, I want you to write down all of the attributes of what you think constitute a good person, a good human being. And sometimes I would make it, I'd give it a sort of Johnny Carson bent by saying, if you were on a desert island, what the characteristics of someone you would if you had to spend the rest of your life on that desert island with this one person, what would this person be like? Forget about sex or anything like that. Just what are the characteristics, Well, I'd like him to have a sense of humor, or I'd like him to know how to make fire from, whatever. The point is that they would then do the third column. And then after they were through, and if you do this in sequence so they can't think about what they've just done, it works better. We would look up, raise up the coverings on the other two columns, and we realized that the good person was a precise synthesis of the attributes of the male and female columns. But what was more astounding was, as we would cover each column and read what the man sounded like, he was awful. He was without feeling. He was impervious to pain, or appeared to be so. He was Rambo. And you can think Rambo's really, really neat, but would you want to spend the weekend with Rambo? Or have a conversation about the Baha'i faith with Rambo. I don't mean Sylvester Stallone. I'm sure he's quite wonderful, but this character, this fictional character, all right, or with Dirty Harry for that matter, or any other character Clint Eastwood has ever played, or 3/4 of the characters that Robert Redford has ever played, and all of the characters John Wayne played. You know? And then you look at the woman and you find out, oh my God, this person is a mess. This person is an emotional pool of sensibilities and about to fall apart. This person needs help, you know. So our social roles that we have created are obviously just infused with flaws, and in effect you can say, well, that's wonderful because we come together and we have this complementarity, this principle of complementarity. And we fit together because you have the qualities I need and I have the qualities you need. No, you know, that's not complementarity. All right? That's some sort of neurotic symbiosis that will destroy you quicker than anything. So complementarity is what the Baha'i principle of equality is about. Not precise sameness, but, again, equality of status, but not identity of function. Okay? Thank you.